Secondary succession of Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan recovery. This is completed by myself, Allie Chisholm, Connor Maloney, and Jordan Sampson.
Point Pleasant Park, Mnutukati, is a municipal park located in Halifax, Canada. In 2003, the park featured even-aged old-growth forest and is an extension of the Acadian forest biome. Since its formation, the park has been dominated by two species, red spruce, Pichia rubens, and red maple, Acer rubrum. Today, the park is open for recreational use. Mnutukati once served as a ceremonial site for the Mi'kmaq people, and now serves as a commemorative site holding many cultural artifacts. Now under municipal control, park management aims to protect sacred sites and incorporate Indigenous traditions. Hurricane Juan was a Category 2 hurricane which hit Nova Scotia September 29, 2003. With 145 km/h winds, Hurricane Juan decimated Nova Scotia and left devastating effects on Point Pleasant Park, killing 70% of the trees and forcing park closure for 8 months. The loss of trees in Point Pleasant Park was largely due to the even-aged nature of the forest. The majority of trees were the same height, forming a canopy under which little else was growing. This left trunks susceptible to high wind speeds. Succession in Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan aligns with patterns observed in long-term wind disturbance studies. Harmon and Pabst note that wind disturbances do not entirely reset ecosystems, but create functional changes over time. This recovery follows the process of secondary succession, which occurs in areas where an ecosystem has been disturbed but the soil remains intact. To examine the effects of Hurricane Juan on forest secondary succession in Point Pleasant Park, this study employs long-term ecological monitoring and comparative analysis. Various community metrics were calculated to assess how the forest has changed since the hurricane. This study answers 3 key research questions. How has the overall forest community changed over time? How has the density of the dominant species changed over time? And how has the chosen community metric changed over time? To answer these questions, 3 null hypotheses were tested. There is no significant relationship between time and overall forest density. There is no significant relationship between time and density of the red spruce and the red maple. And there is no significant relationship in the Shannon Diversity Index over time.
To study the process of secondary succession in Point Pleasant Park, 5 areas were chosen as study sites. These sites were chosen as they were all found to have sustained the greatest damage to their environment from the hurricane. Each study site was 20 meters by 20 meters in size. Within each site, the density of specific tree species were counted along with the diameter at rest height, or DBH for short. This is when the diameter of the tree is measured 4.5 feet off the ground. Using the standard measuring procedure makes industry comparison much easier. Retractable measuring tapes were used to create the 20 by 20 plots of land, which were studied. 1 by 1 wooden frames were used to estimate cover percentage within the study site. Meter-long measuring tapes were used to measure the diameter of the trees for the DBH values. Data sheets were used to record the data along with identification guides, which helped students identify plants within their study site. If plants were unable to be identified, they were brought back to the lab for further examination and identification. One of the questions that this study sought to answer was how the forest community has changed as a whole. To answer this question, the total density at 5 sites were recorded yearly with the exceptions of 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2020. In each site, the total number of trees were counted in order to obtain the density value. The forest community in Point Pleasant Park has seen a steady resurgence since Hurricane Juan in 2003, as shown in Figure 1. Figure 1 shows a 2,081% increase in density in 2024 as compared to 2004. Regression analysis determined a p-value of 5.1 times 10 to the negative 14, which is considered significant. With an R2 value of about 0.49, a 49% relation between time and density is shown. With both of these values, the null hypothesis stating that there was no change in density is rejected in favor of the alternative hypothesis, which accurately predicts an increase in density. The trend aligns with succession theory, which predicts a progressive increase in density over the succession period. The largest increases in density occur in the earlier stages of the succession compared to the later ones. As the park approaches the climax community, the rate of increase in density will begin to slow down in the park. Eventually, the rate of increase is expected to peak at the climax community, where the density values will then remain generally level.
To test the hypotheses, density measures were taken at 4 consistent sites and density values were standardized to individuals per 400 meters squared. Over 20 years, red maple density had many fluctuations, often reaching densities around 150 trees per 400 meters squared, then crashing to densities below 3 trees per 400 meters squared, as seen in Figure 2. The red maple often stabilized at densities of 40 trees per 400 meters squared. By 2024, the red maple density in 400 meters squared showed an increase of 1,400% by 2024. The regression analysis gave an R-squared value of 0.16 and a p-value of 0.0002. The p-value rejects the null hypothesis. The R-squared value indicates that only 16% of variation in density can be attributed to time. The red spruce density in 400 meters squared increased by 200% by 2024 from 2004, as seen in Figure 3. Compared to red maple rates, the red spruce increased in density at a much more steady rate until 2024 and had a smaller overall increase. The regression analysis gave an R-squared value of 0.12 and a p-value of 0.0009. The p-value allows for the rejection of the null hypothesis, and the R-squared value indicates only 12% of variation in red spruce density can be attributed to time. Fluctuations in red maple density, Figure 2, may be explained by self-thinning caused by an overshoot of carrying capacity. The density of red maples often stabilized around 40 trees per 400 meters squared, indicating this as the carrying capacity. Therefore, as the forest reaches climax community, the population of red maples is likely to remain at this density, as it is seen in 2023 and 2024. The red spruce were much slower to increase in density compared to the red maple and showed a lower increase, Figure 3. This is likely because of their different shade tolerances. Red spruce is a shade-tolerant species, while red maple is a shade-intolerant species. Red maple grows first because it prefers an open canopy that provides plenty of sunlight. Red spruce, however, can only begin to thrive once another species, in this case red maple, has established a canopy to block some of the sunlight. Both populations have relatively low R-squared values, indicating there are factors other than time affecting their density. This makes their future densities more difficult to predict. Since red maple thrives in an open canopy, if many disturbances continue in the park, it is expected that red maple will continue to thrive. As red maple creates a canopy, red spruce numbers are likely to increase following it. Without disturbances, red maple density is likely to remain more stable, while red spruce will be able to increase. The observed patterns of recovery in Point Pleasant Park from 2004 to 2024 align with established models of secondary succession. The large increase in maple density indicates it may be an early successional species which develops the forest for late successional species, the red spruce. This shift follows the facilitation model, where early colonizers alter environmental conditions, allowing late successional species to establish.
The data collected was to observe secondary succession in Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan in 2003. The intention was to observe a significant relationship in the Shannon Diversity Index over 20 years. The question was approached by collecting data in the same forest plots every year from 2004 to 2024. Specifically, density and size of each tree species were continuously collected. The data is shown in Figure 4, which includes a graph and linear regression analysis. The regression analysis gave a p-value of 2.2 times 10 to the negative 16, allowing the rejection of the null hypothesis. Therefore, it can be determined that there is a significant relationship in the Shannon Diversity Index and time, and that the community in Point Pleasant Park is undergoing secondary succession. Shannon diversity in Point Pleasant Park displays an increasing trend among the species throughout the years as well. This can be viewed by the positive slope of the regression equation. Shannon diversity is equal to 0.0606 times the year minus 120.85. The QC statement for this question is Shannon's diversity index of tree species, density, and size were measured in Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan. There was an increase of 23% in species from 2004 to 2024, indicating the community is undergoing secondary succession. Comparing these results to a study completed by Deror et al. In 2016, who observed tropical forests through successional processes, our results are very similar. They concluded that species richness increased with succession, showing a gradual accumulation of species, as did Shannon Diversity Index. My prediction of what will happen to the Shannon Diversity Index as the forest moves towards its climax community is that the increase will begin to slow down as the community fully recovers. This is because the climax community describes a stable environment with a balance of species. Similarly, a study was conducted by Guaraguada and Ostertag in 2001, who observed woody plant species undergoing secondary forest succession in Colombia, Brazil, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, and Panama. Their results confirm species richness and Shannon Diversity Index increased rapidly during the first years, but within no more than a few decades, reached values comparable to before destruction.
In the case of Hurricane Juan, much of the devastation to Point Pleasant Park was caused by high wind speeds. Halifax Regional Municipality tells us that forests located along coastlines face much greater winds, meaning Point Pleasant Park's coastal location likely added to the magnitude of the disturbance faced. Another geographical consideration adding to the destruction of Hurricane Juan is wind direction. In Halifax, the most devastating hurricanes are ones which travel from the south over the ocean, and the areas most affected are southward facing slopes. Unfortunately, Hurricane Juan hit Halifax from the south, and much of Point Pleasant Park consisted of southward facing slopes. A topographical analysis post Hurricane Juan revealed all three southward facing slope regions were decimated. Z et al. Found that succession is influenced by severity and frequency of wind disturbances, which was influenced by geographic region. In regions with infrequent hurricanes, forests are less adapted to withstand winds, causing high rates of mortality and a slower recovery. In the case of Hurricane Juan, Point Pleasant Park was not adapted to wind disturbances as indicated by the even-aged forest. This explains why Point Pleasant Park was impacted so strongly by Hurricane Juan and why succession has been slow.
The presence of invasive species in successional environments may slow or inhibit the natural processes of succession of native species. Invasive species typically reproduce quicker and have a wider range than native species, which gives them a distinct advantage in successional environments. There is a direct correlation between the effect of invasive species and the stage of succession in which the native species were in. Species in early and middle stages of succession exhibited much more poor growth than species in later stages of succession when in competition with non-native species. Due to the enhanced effects of invasive species in successional environments, researchers and park managers actively monitor the park for invasive species. In 2009, an invasive species called the Himalayan balsam was found in Point Pleasant Park. As this would be in the park in the earlier stages of succession, the effects of this species could be very detrimental to the native species in the park. Steps were put in place that worked to remove and control the spread of the species. These efforts were generally effective and helped maintain the environment in a way that would not have happened in a less monitored and more natural ecosystem.
Climate change is known as the long-term changes in Earth's temperature and weather patterns. Specifically, the Earth's temperature is rising and more extreme storms are expected to occur. With this knowledge, climate change will definitely have an effect on the rate of recovery. Chang and Turner in 2019 mentioned that climate change will influence community recovery rates and restoration in the future. They also mentioned that climate change will affect dispersal processes in direct and indirect ways, influencing successional progressions. Overall, climate change will influence the progression of total density, Shannon diversity scores, and species density by slowing the process down or increasing setbacks. In conclusion, there was a significant relationship between total density of overall forest community over the years. There was no significant relationship between time and density for red maple. There was a significant relationship between time and density for the red spruce, and there was a significant relationship between Shannon Diversity Index over the years. Based on these trends in the data, Point Pleasant Park is undergoing secondary succession. We believe the Acadian forest in Point Pleasant Park is mid-succession stage as there has been no data stating any slowness of the increase involved in total density, and Shannon Diversity Index over the years of 2004 to 2024. This also indicates the community has yet to climax. Two examples of how being an urban park can affect succession includes human disturbance and maintenance of the park itself. Looking at Figure 4, the Shannon Diversity Index has some variability in increase. While the overall result is a significant increase, human disturbances such as going off the trail sites, littering, or any sort of destruction to the species can cause a variability in this data. Similarly, maintenance of the park itself ensures the health of all species in the forest. Therefore, looking at figures 1, 2, and 3 indicates the park was well maintained as the total density and density of species has an increase. Overall, ensuring the forest is well maintained and that human disturbances do not occur will allow the succession process to be successful. Rico and Hestad in 2022 highlight that an important element to Indigenous is natural resources. I think that being more mindful of the resources around us is important for assisting Point Pleasant Park's recovery to a mature Acadian forest. Being aware that humans have an impact on forest succession is a good start, but overall, ensuring not to cause disturbances while in the park will ensure that succession is successful.
We would like to thank Dr. Allison Schmidt for her instruction as well as Vanessa Landry for her support. Additionally, we acknowledge the contributions of previous Bio 2060 students and Christine Beauchamp, whose work provided the data for this research. Finally, we would like to thank Dalhousie University for providing the resources and facilities necessary to complete this research.
These are our references.